I looked at the envelope lying on the coffee table. It was a plain white envelope, unstamped and unaddressed. Archibald had brought it yesterday, put it right in front of me and said, "Orson, I think you should see this." Inside was a wedding invitation. My son Ebner's wedding, which I learned about from a stranger, not my own child. Archie was a good friend, one of the few people who stayed with me after all of life's twists and turns. He'd handled my legal affairs for over 30 years before retiring and had somehow kept in contact with Sibylla and Ebner after our divorce. The invitation came to Bertha, he explained, referring to his wife. She is still in touch with some of Sibylla's friends. I thought you should know. Now I was sitting in my chair, sipping whiskey and looking at the exquisite invitation with intricate gold letters. Ebner Hadley and Pauline Driscoll invite you to share in the joy of their marriage. The ceremony was to take place in 3 weeks at the River Valley Estate, the most expensive wedding venue in New Kensington. 22 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen my son. He was then a skinny teenager with a scowl on his face and clenched fists. "You never really loved us," were his last words before he slammed the door of my new home, where I'd invited him over for dinner. He never came again. I remember Sibyl crying at the court hearing during our divorce, talking about how I had been emotionally absent all the years of our marriage, how I missed Ebner's school events because of work, how I was more committed to my company than my family. Her story made me seem like an emotionless monster. She wasn't lying. I did miss birthdays, school plays, and parent-teacher conferences. Often I'd come home when Ebner was already asleep and leave when he wasn't yet awake. I was building a company, turning a tiny workshop into a large industrial equipment manufacturing facility. Every day was a fight for the survival of the business, every contract a victory in the war against the competition. I thought I was securing my family's future, that my sacrifices would one day pay off and we would all have a better life. What I didn't realize was that while I was building that future, the present was slipping through my fingers. When I finally managed to get the company to a sustainable level, my family had already broken up. Sibyl had filed for divorce, saying she could no longer live with a man who considered her and my son to be an add-on to his business. I tried to explain that I did everything for them, but it sounded hollow even to myself. After the divorce, Sibyl got our house, generous alimony, and most importantly, Ebner's complete loyalty. He was 15 when we split up, and he sided unequivocally with his mother. I tried to keep in touch. I called. I wrote letters. I went to school plays, standing in the far corner so as not to embarrass him, sent gifts for birthdays and holidays. Most came back unopened. Over the years, my company grew to become one of the top industrial equipment manufacturers in the state. I became a wealthy man, though I didn't change much about my lifestyle. Same modest house in a quiet neighborhood I bought after my divorce. The same old Lincoln, now 10 years old. I never sought luxury, preferring to invest in business and save for the future. 3 times I tried to help Ebner with money. When he went to college, I offered to pay for his tuition, but I received a sharp refusal. When he graduated, I tried to give him a car. He sent it back with a note saying, "I don't need your compensation for not having one." When he got his first job, I tried sending him a check for a down payment on an apartment. The envelope came back unopened. Through our mutual acquaintances, I knew Ebner had grown up to become a cybersecurity specialist. I was proud of him, albeit from a distance. I also knew that Sibyl had remarried and divorced. I knew nothing about my son's fiancée other than the name on the invitation. The whiskey in my glass had run out, and I still didn't know what to do with this information. Go to the wedding as an uninvited guest? What would that accomplish other than another humiliation? The next day I called Archie. "What are you planning to do?" he asked after I'd exchanged greetings. "I haven't decided yet," I answered, "but I have an idea. Could you find out who's organizing the wedding?" "Organizing?" Archie paused. "Are you trying to ruin Ebner's wedding?" "Orson, I don't think—" "No, of course not," I interrupted him. "I want to do something else. Just find out who the organizer is, okay?" 2 days later, I had that information. Theodosia Prentice, owner of a small but prestigious event management agency. I set up an appointment, introducing myself as a family friend wanting to give the newlyweds a gift. Theodosia's office was in a restored historic building downtown. She was an energetic woman in her 50s with a short haircut and a discerning eye. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hadley?" she asked as we sat down in her office with cups of tea. "I suppose you've already guessed that I'm not just a friend of the family," I began. "You're the father of the groom," she nodded. "I study my clients, Mr. Hadley, and I noticed that your name isn't on the guest list, even though you're clearly alive and living in the same town. We have a complicated relationship," I admitted. "Very complicated. We haven't spoken in over 20 years." Theodosia chuckled. "Family dramas are commonplace in my line of work. What do you want?" "I want to pay for the wedding. The whole wedding, but anonymously." Her eyebrows went up. "That's, an unusual request. A River Valley wedding isn't cheap, Mr. Hadley. Money is no problem. But on one condition, no one can know it's me. Tell them it's a gift from an anonymous benefactor if an explanation is needed." Theodosia studied me for a long moment with her gaze, then nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. But let me ask you, why? Why not just offer to pay for everything directly?" I grinned bitterly. "Because he'd refuse. He'd refused any help from me since he was 15. Ebner, he's very proud and very resentful. He thinks I betrayed him and his mother. That money has always been more important to me than family. If he finds out I'm paying for the wedding, he'll cancel it rather than accept my help. And yet you want to pay, because I'm responsible for him. I missed his childhood, busy with business. I missed his adolescence because we had a fight. I missed his adulthood because of our shared pride. I can't get that time back, but I can give him at least one day a day he'll remember for a lifetime." I didn't tell her about my secret hope that this gesture would somehow soften Ebner's heart if he ever learned the truth. It sounded too naive even in my head. "Well," Theodosia said after a long pause, "that's your decision. But if I may offer some advice, sometimes a parent's best gift to a child is simply to be present in his or her life." "For that, you have to get an invitation," I replied. "And I wasn't invited. We made an agreement. I signed a check for an impressive sum in a special contract that gave me the right to cancel payment at any time before the end of the event if unforeseen circumstances arose. This was a standard clause in her contracts, though it was usually used in cases where the wedding was canceled due to a broken engagement or other force majeure. "So the wedding is fully paid for," I confirmed, looking at the signed document. "From the catering to the last boutonniere." Theodosia nodded. "I'll let the young people know that an anonymous sponsor has come forward to take care of all the expenses. There are usually a lot of questions in such situations, but I know how to be persuasive. Oh, and one more thing. I plan to attend the wedding." Theodosia froze. "Minus Mr. Hadley, I'm not sure that's a good idea. I just want to see my son on that day, at least from afar." "You're not invited." "I know I'm not, but this is my only son's wedding. I've missed too many important moments in his life. I can't miss this one." She sighed. "I can't stop you. But remember, a public scandal at a wedding is the last thing your son would want. I'll keep a low profile, I promise." When I got home, I sat in my office for a long time, pondering my decision. Part of me thought I was doing the right thing. The other part whispered that I was doing it all wrong again, trying to pay off instead of truly mending the relationship. I opened my laptop and typed Ebner's fiancée's name into the search engine. Pauline Driscoll, a few photos on social media, a professional page. Judging by the information, she worked as a receptionist at a prestigious private clinic. Attractive woman in her 30s with a confident look and a flawless smile. Several photos showed her with Ebner. They looked happy. My son has grown into a tall man, much like me when I was young. Same chin line, same broad shoulders. In the back of my mind, I hoped to find some flaw in Pauline, some reason to disapprove of my son's choice. But in the pictures, she looked flawless. Should I be the judge? I'd lost my say in Ebner's life years ago. For the next 2 weeks, I was on pins and needles. I mentally replayed scenarios of how this could go down. Best case scenario, I quietly attend the ceremony, see my son happy, and leave unnoticed. At worst, I get recognized and a scandal breaks out. Somewhere in the middle was the option in which I finally talk to Ebner, and we take the first step toward reconciliation. This option seemed the least realistic. The week before the wedding, I bought a new suit, a navy blue, conservative but elegant. My old closet consisted mostly of simple shirts and pants, suitable for the office but not for formal occasions. I visited a barber shop where I got a haircut and tidied up my graying beard. "Special occasion?" the barber asked, noticing my tension. "A wedding," I answered briefly. "Oh, congratulations. Yours?" "Known by the my son's." He nodded and asked no more questions, for which I was grateful. 3 days ago, I received a message from Theodosia. "The preparations are going according to plan. The young ones are very grateful to an anonymous benefactor. Your idea for additional flower arrangements is approved." I hadn't asked for additional flowers, but apparently Theodosia decided to add something special on my behalf. She turned out to be an unexpectedly tactful person. Yesterday, I received another message. "The final details are settled. Wedding day after tomorrow at 3 p.m. Attached is a photo of the venue. Attached to the message was a picture of River Valley Estate, a grand mansion with columns drenched in flowers. A lavish wedding for the son of a man who himself shunned any luxury. The irony did not escape me. Today, on the eve of the wedding, I suddenly realized that I still hadn't decided exactly what I would do. Would I enter the ceremony hall and sit in the far corner? Or would I watch through the window? Or perhaps it would be better to wait until the reception, when it would be easier to get lost in the crowd. I sat in my office looking at old photographs. Ebner at 5 years old on his first bicycle. Ebner at 10, proudly displaying a school project. Ebner at 14, a few months before our divorce. Already wary, already distant. At the time, I'd written it off as adolescence. Now I realized he'd already sensed our family was falling apart. My phone rang. Archie. "Are you still planning to go tomorrow?" he asked me without preamble. "Yeah. What are you going to tell Ebner?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'll just watch from a distance." "Orson," Archie sounded worried. "I understand you want to see your son, but breaking into his wedding after 20 years of silence—" "I'm not going to break in," I countered. "I'm going to be quiet and inconspicuous." "Discreet? You're the groom's father, and you look like an older version of Ebner. Someone's bound to notice the resemblance." He was right, of course, but I've already made up my mind. "I have to be there, Archie. For once in my life, I have to act like a real father." "A real father respects his children's boundaries," he said softly. "A real father doesn't miss his son's wedding," I countered. We were both silent for a moment, realizing we'd reached an impasse. "Well, good luck then," Archie said finally. "Call me afterward and let me know how it went." "If I don't get arrested for trespassing," I tried to joke. "Not funny, Orson." After talking to Archie, I couldn't calm down for a long time. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should respect Ebner's choice and not show up where I wasn't invited. But the voice inside kept telling me that this was your son, your only child, and you had a right to see him on your wedding day. Toward evening, I took the suit out of the closet and hung it on the door to smooth out the creases. I polished the shoes, prepared my cufflinks, the only expensive item in my closet, a gift from my father for my own wedding. Silver engraved with my initials. I'd only worn them a few times in my life, at the most important moments. Tomorrow was definitely one of them. The night passed restlessly. I fell asleep and woke up, tormented by strange dreams in which Ebner was hugging me happily or shoving me out the door in a rage. In one dream, Sybil was laughing as the guards led me out of the hall, and in another, she was crying and apologizing for all these years. I woke at dawn with a headache and a heaviness in my chest. I couldn't get breakfast down my throat. I drank only coffee, strong and bitter like my thoughts of the past. It was going to be a long day. The ceremony was still many hours away, and I was already on edge, like I was before an important business meeting. Only the stakes were much higher than any contract. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. New Kensington in September is especially nice. The trees are just beginning to change color. The air is fresh but not yet cold. I walked down familiar streets, past the park where I used to walk with little Ebner, past the old school where he went to grade school. Memories came in waves. This is where he fell off his bike and shattered his knee, and I carried him home in my arms. This was the playground where he climbed the tallest slide for the first time on his own. And in that cafe, we celebrated his 10th birthday, his last truly happy birthday before everything went downhill. The walk didn't bring relief, On the contrary, it made me yearn for the irrevocably lost time. I came home more determined than when I went out. Tomorrow I would see my son, and so be it. I spent the rest of the day getting my affairs in order. I went through the mail, answered a few work emails, even though I had formally stepped away from the operational management of the company for 2 years, leaving myself only a position on the board of directors. I called the CFO and discussed the quarterly results. All this was an attempt to distract myself, to occupy my hands and head with something familiar and understandable. In the evening came the last message from Theodosia. Everything is ready. Ceremony tomorrow at 3. The weather promises to be great. I wrote back, thanks for everything. I'll be there tomorrow. Good luck, she replied after a pause. Before going to bed, I checked my suit, cufflinks, shoes one more time. Everything was ready to go. Tomorrow I would see Ebner for the first time in 22 years. My son would be getting married, and I would be there, uninvited, but with an entrance fee equal to the entire cost of the wedding. As I fell asleep, I imagined how things might have been if I had been a different person, if I hadn't missed the school holidays, if I'd spent more time at home, if I'd learned to listen to Sibylla before it was too late. Maybe then I would have gotten a real invitation to my son's wedding. Maybe then he himself would have asked me to be his best man. But there was no changing the past. I could only hope that the future could still be fixed. With this thought, I finally fell asleep, preparing for the most important day of the last 20 years of my life. The morning of the wedding day was clear and windless. I woke up before dawn, even though the ceremony was not to begin until 1500 hours. The restless sleep did not bring rest. All night long I was haunted by fragments of memories mixed with anxious forebodings. I stood under the shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the tension. Then I shaved thoroughly, trying not to cut myself with trembling hands. I couldn't eat breakfast. My throat constricted at the thought of food. He only drank a cup of strong black coffee, looking out the window at the waking city. Time stretched agonizingly slowly. I checked my suit a few times, cleaned my already spotless shoes, and reread the messages from Theodosia. Around 11 o'clock, I couldn't stand it any longer and called Archie. "Are you still going?" he asked instead of greeting me. "Yes," I answered. "I can't not go." "You realize Sybil's probably going to be there, right?" I swallowed. Meeting my ex-wife scared me as much as meeting my son. In 22 years, we'd only seen each other twice, at the funerals of mutual friends, and both times we'd only nodded. "I understand, but I should be there." Archie sighed. "Okay, buddy, good luck to you. Call me if anything goes wrong." By 13 o'clock, I was all set. The navy blue suit fit perfectly, though I felt uncomfortable in it, too used to casual clothes. Silver cufflinks glinted on the cuffs. At the last moment, I decided not to wear a tie. It seemed to choke me, adding to my anxiety. At the beginning of the second, I got into the car. It was about a 40-minute drive to the River Valley estate, but I wanted to arrive early so I could look around and perhaps find a place from which I could observe the ceremony unobtrusively. The road out of town was surprisingly clear. The old Lincoln cruised smoothly down the highway, and my thoughts drifted back to the past. I remembered the day Ebner was born, how I held him, tiny and red, afraid to break him. His first steps, his first words. The school plays I was often late for or didn't show up for at all. How my son's face would change when he saw me in the doorway of the auditorium when the show was already over. First joy, then disappointment, and in the last years before the divorce, just a cold statement of fact. River Valley Estate appeared on the horizon, a huge colonial-style mansion surrounded by a manicured park. The driveway was lined with expensive cars. The guests were already starting to arrive, even though the ceremony was over an hour away. I parked in the far corner of the parking lot, away from the main entrance. For a while, I just sat in the car, gathering my courage. Through the windshield, I watched the guests. Elegant women in flying dresses, men in strict suits. All of them looked confident and satisfied with life, unlike me. Finally, taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked slowly toward the mansion. As I approached the main entrance, I was overtaken by a young couple who were excitedly discussing how well everything was organized. They say there is some secret sponsor who paid for the whole wedding, the woman said. Can you believe it? Pauline said it was an anonymous well-wisher. Probably some rich relative of Ebner's, her companion suggested. I chuckled involuntarily. If only they knew how close to the truth they were. River Valley's front entrance was a wide marble staircase leading up to massive doors. On either side of the stairs were huge vases of white roses and greenery. Above the entrance was an archway of flowers with the initials E and P intertwined in an elegant pattern. In the spacious lobby, guests were greeted and directed by two girls in matching pale blue dresses. They were checking the list, marking the arrivals, and pointing the way to the ceremony site, a courtyard where rows of white chairs were arranged in front of a flowered archway. I slowed my step as I approached the registration table. One of the girls looked up and gave me a professional smile. Good afternoon. Your name, please. Orson Hadley, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Her fingers quickly ran through the list. Her smile became uncertain. I'm sorry, but I don't see you on the guest list. I'm the groom's father, I said quietly. The girl blinked confusedly. One moment, please. She stepped aside and whispered something to her colleague. She too looked at the list, frowned and shook her head. The first girl took out her phone and dialed a number, turning away from me. I stood there feeling the blood rush to my cheeks. The situation was getting awkward. A few of the guests who arrived after me were looking in my direction curiously. After a couple minutes, the girl returned, her face a look of embarrassment. Minus Mr. Hadley, I'm sorry, but your name is indeed not on the list. I contacted the coordinator, and she said she couldn't let you through without confirmation from the bride or groom. I understand, I nodded. Can I speak to my son? Ebner is getting ready for the ceremony right now, she faltered, but I can take a message. At that moment, Theodosia Prentice appeared from a side corridor. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, then walked toward us with determination. What's the problem, Leela? She asked her assistant. Oh, this gentleman claims to be the groom's father, but he's not on the list, she replied. Theodosia turned to me. There was a warning in her eyes. Minus Mr. Hadley, she said formally. I remember our meeting, but I cannot allow you to attend the ceremony without an invitation. I understand, I said, but it's very important that I see my son today. She lowered her voice. We agreed that you would remain an anonymous benefactor. Your appearance here could cause complications. I just want to be quietly present, I insisted. No one will even notice me. Theodosia clearly hesitated. At that moment, a woman's voice came from the corridor leading to the courtyard. Theodosia, have you seen my mother? She must have... The voice broke off as its owner entered the hallway and saw us. It was she, Pauline Driscoll, my son's fiancée. She looked even more spectacular in person than she did in the pictures. Tall, slender, with perfect posture and cold blue eyes. Her wedding dress was a work of art, dainty in the front, with an intricate lace train. What's going on? She asked, looking at me appraisingly. Miss Driscoll, Theodosia began. This gentleman... I'm Ebner's father, I interrupted, stepping forward. Orson Hadley. Pauline froze. Her gaze slid down my face, lingered on my eyes, the same eyes as her fiancé's, and then dropped to my suit. I was suddenly acutely aware that, despite its quality, it looked modest compared to the expensive outfits of the other guests. Ebner's father, she repeated slowly. Interesting. Ebner had said his father had died years ago. It was like a kick in the butt. So to my son, I was dead. It's easier to cut me out of his life completely than to explain a complicated relationship. As you can see, I'm quite alive, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. And you decided to show up today? Uninvited? There was irritation in her tone. What do you want? Just to see my son on his wedding day. Pauline crossed her arms over her chest. Look, Mr. Hadley, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a special day for me and Ebner, and I'm not going to let you ruin it. I'm not going to ruin anything, I assured him. I'm going to sit quietly in the far corner. You're not on the guest list, she cut me off. Then you're not invited. Ebner made it clear who he wanted to see tonight and who he didn't. By now our conversation had attracted the attention of other guests. Several people stopped nearby to watch the scene unfold. Pauline, maybe we should ask Ebner, Theodosia suggested quietly. This is his father, after all. If that man really is his father, Pauline gave me a look of doubt. He looks more like some beggar who heard about the wedding and decided to sneak into the reception. How did you even find out about today's event? From a mutual acquaintance? I answered evasively. See? Pauline turned to Theodosia. He can't even give me a name. Archibald Whitaker, I said. A friend of mine and a former lawyer. His wife Bertha got the invitation. The old Whitaker men? Pauline frowned. They're friends of Ebner's mother, not his. Sibyl and I were married for 15 years, I reminded her. We had mutual friends. A flicker of doubt flashed across Pauline's face, but she got over it quickly. It doesn't matter. The fact remains that you're not on the guest list. You're not invited. I'm asking you to leave. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Who was she to keep me out of my own son's wedding? But I restrained myself, realizing that a scandal would only hurt. I just want to congratulate my son, I said. 5 minutes, no more. If Ebner wanted to congratulate you, he would have invited you, Pauline parried. But he didn't. What does that tell you? That we have a complicated relationship, I admitted. But today is a special day. A special day that you're trying to ruin by showing up, she interrupted. Theodosia, would you please escort this gentleman to the exit and warn the guards to keep him back? Theodosia looked uncomfortable. Pauline, perhaps we should still... No, the bride said. I'm not going to let some stranger claiming to be Ebner's father ruin our day. She turned to me. Leave now, or I'll call security. By now, a small group of guests had gathered in the lobby, watching with interest. I could feel their eyes on me, curious, sympathetic, judgmental. I stood there not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to insist, to demand to see my son. The other part realized that a scandal at the wedding was the last thing I wanted. I'd come to congratulate Ebner, not ruin his day. You don't belong here, Pauline continued, seeing my hesitation. You're not invited, and I'm not going to bother Ebner for some imposter. An imposter? I echoed, feeling my cheeks start to burn. Exactly, she nodded. If you really are his father, why doesn't he ever talk about you? Why did he tell me you were dead? Why didn't he invite me to the wedding? Her words were like slaps, one after another. But most painful of all, there was some truth to them. To Ebner, I really was dead. It was my own fault. Miss Driscoll, Theodosia interposed. Mr. Hadley really... Not now, Theodosia, Pauline cut off. I'm not going to let some tramp spoil our wedding. A tramp. That word hit me the hardest. I looked at my suit, a nice suit, but not luxurious. At my hands, workmanlike, calloused from the tools I'd once used to create my production. At my cufflinks, the only expensive thing I wore today. In this woman's eyes, I was just a tramp trying to sneak into someone else's party. I'm not a tramp, I said quietly. I am Ebner's father, and I have a right to see my son on his wedding day. Leave, Pauline repeated, or I'll call security. I realized I was losing this battle. The longer I stayed, the greater the risk of a real scandal breaking out, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to ruin Ebner's wedding day. Okay, I nodded. I'll leave. But please tell my son that I came by, and that I'm proud of him. I will, Pauline said with a fake smile that made it clear she wasn't going to pass anything on. I turned to leave, feeling the stares of the guests on me. Embarrassment and humiliation burned my cheeks. I took a few steps toward the exit when I heard Pauline's voice behind me. And don't come back. No one is waiting for you here. I walked slowly back to my car, feeling the humiliation turn into a burning mixture of resentment and anger. Each step along the gravel path sent a throbbing in my temples. The bitterness inside me grew stronger with each meter away from the mansion. Tramp, the word echoed in my head. I, the man who had built a successful company from scratch, employed hundreds of people, paid for this very wedding, was a tramp, unworthy to attend my own son's celebration. When I reached the car, I sank heavily into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I reached for the keys. I needed to calm down, gather my thoughts. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes, trying to breathe more evenly. In 22 years, I'd gotten used to the idea that Ebner didn't want to see me. I'd resigned myself to the role of absent father, though I tried to reestablish contact from time to time. But to hear that I was dead to my son, that it was easier for him to think of me as dead than just a bad father, it was too painful. And that woman, Pauline, her scornful gaze assessing my suit, her haughty tone when she spoke of my rights. She didn't know me, didn't know the whole story, but she had already passed judgment. Suddenly I remembered my contract with Theodosia, the clause that gave me the right to cancel payment at any time before the end of the event. Originally, it had been a standard legal technicality, an insurance policy in case the wedding was canceled. But now, I pulled out my phone and found Theodosia's number. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me wanted to just go home, forget this humiliating experience. Let Ebner enjoy the wedding day even if I wasn't there. But the other part, hurt and angry, demanded justice. I pressed the call button. Minus Mr. Hadley? Theodosia's voice sounded tense. Yes, it's me, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. I have a question about our contract. I'm listening to you. Her tone was wary. The clause about canceling payments. Is it still valid? There was a short pause. Yes, she finally answered. Until the event is over, you have the right to cancel payment. But Mr. Hadley, I strongly advise you to consider. I've already thought about it, I interrupted. I want to exercise that right. Cancel all payments. Immediately. Minus Mr. Hadley, she said in a pleading tone. Please, let's discuss this. I understand that you're upset about your conversation with Miss Driscoll, but upset? I grinned bitterly. That's an understatement. I've been made to look like a tramp from my son's own wedding, a wedding I paid for. Pauline didn't know you were a sponsor, Theodosia reminded me. You asked me to keep it a secret. And now I'm asking you to cancel the payment, I said firmly. It is my right under the contract. Theodosia took a deep breath. Technically, yes, but think of the consequences. Everything is ready. The guests have gathered. The ceremony is about to begin. It would be a disaster. For whom? I asked. For Pauline, who just humiliated me in front of a dozen guests? Or for my son, who prefers to think of me as dead? For everyone, she said softly, including you, Mr. Hadley. Such an act would only reinforce Ebner's opinion that you are not a man he could be proud of. Her words were like a cold shower. She was right. Canceling the payment now, sabotaging the wedding because of wounded pride, it would only confirm everything Ebner had thought of me all these years. That I was a selfish man who put my own interests before the welfare of my family. Minus Mr. Hadley? Theodosia called after a long pause. Are you still there? Yeah, I answered. I must think about it. Of course, she sounded relieved. Take some time to think it over. But remember, some decisions can't be undone. I ended the call and put the phone on the seat next to me. Then I started the car and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. I needed to drive around, get my thoughts in order. I drove down the winding road that surrounded the River Valley estate with no particular goal in mind. Just to move, not to sit still. Thoughts swirled around in my head like fall leaves in the wind. 15 minutes later, I found myself making a full circle and approaching the mansion again. I parked on a small observation deck that overlooked the backyard of the mansion. From here, I had a good view of the ceremony site rows of white chairs, a flower arch, musicians tuning their instruments. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Theodosia's number again. Yes, Mr. Hadley? I've made my decision, I said. I'm canceling the payment. But I'm canceling the payment, I repeated, and replacing it with a new payment. On my card. Right now. Yeah, I don't understand, she was confused. It's simple, I explained. Hona, I want you to cancel the anonymous payment and publicly announce that there was a problem with funding. And then, in a few minutes, announce that there is a new sponsor. Me, Orson Hadley, the father of the groom, and I'm taking over all expenses. That's, it's rather dramatic, Theodosia said cautiously. Exactly, I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I want Pauline to realize who she called a tramp. I want Ebner to know that his dead father had paid for the wedding with his own labor, not just showed up as an uninvited guest. It would create a scene, Theodosia warned. A scandal, perhaps. I know, I said, But I'm tired of being invisible in my own son's life. If the only way to get him to see me is to make a scene, so be it. Theodosia was silent for a while. Very well, she said at last. I will do as you ask, but I must warn you that the consequences may be unpredictable. I'm prepared for that, I replied. When can you make the announcement? Everyone's going to the ceremony now. I can do it right before it starts, in about 20 minutes. Great, I said. I'll be there. You're going back? I could hear the surprise in her voice. Yes, I want to see Pauline's face when she realizes that she has driven away the man who paid for the whole wedding. Minus Mr. Hadley, Theodosia began. But I interrupted. I knew I was acting impulsively, perhaps even petulantly. But after 22 years of silence and rejection, something inside me had broken. I no longer wanted to be invisible, a ghost to be brushed aside. I wanted Ebner to see me, let him be angry, let him hate me more, but at least acknowledge my existence. I started the car again and drove back to the mansion. This time I parked closer to the main entrance. The guests were still arriving, many of them already heading toward the garden ceremony site. I got out of the car and walked slowly towards the entrance, preparing for my second attempt. This time I didn't stop at the front desk. I walked confidently past the confused female coordinators and headed straight into the courtyard. No one tried to stop me. Perhaps they remembered the recent incident and didn't want a repeat of the scene. I took a seat in the last row, on the edge. I had a good view, but I didn't attract much attention. A few guests looked curiously in my direction, but no one approached. Apparently, the news of the strange man claiming to be the groom's father had not yet spread widely. The musicians played a light tune, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. Guests chatted, laughed, took their seats. Everything looked perfect. The flowers, the decorations, the smiling faces. And it was all thanks to me, a man who was not allowed to attend his own paid wedding. A few minutes later, I noticed movement at the entrance to the mansion. Theodosia stepped out onto the small platform where the microphone was set up. Her face looked tense but professional. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, please have your attention for a moment. The conversations died down. All eyes turned to her. Unfortunately, we have had some financial difficulties, Theodosia continued. The anonymous sponsor who had paid for tonight's gala had withdrawn his support. A whisper of surprise and concern swept through the rows of guests. This means, Theodosia paused, that we are forced to suspend the event until the circumstances are clarified. I apologize profusely. The whispers grew into a rumble of anxious voices. People turned to each other, perplexed and indignant. Some stood up, about to leave. Others loudly demanded explanations. At that moment, Pauline ran out of the door of the mansion. Her face was contorted with panic. She was followed by Ebner, looking confused and bewildered. They quickly approached Theodosia, and a tense conversation ensued between them that I couldn't hear over the distance and the noise. I could see Pauline waving her arms around, Ebner trying to calm her down, Theodosia explaining something to both of them. Then Theodosia pointed my direction, and their gazes, Pauline and Ebner, turned to me. I stood up so they could see me better. Our eyes met across a space filled with anxious guests. Pauline's face changed as she recognized me. Shock, disbelief, and then understanding and horror. Ebner just looked puzzled, not yet fully realizing what was happening. Theodosia turned to the microphone again. Ladies and gentlemen, I have good news. The situation has been resolved. The new sponsor has agreed to take care of all the expenses for tonight's event. She paused dramatically. Minus Mr. Orson Hadley, the groom's father, has generously offered to pay for his son's entire wedding. The guests murmured again, but now there was relief mixed with curiosity in their voices. Many turned to look at me. I stood motionless, feeling everyone's eyes turn in my direction. Pauline said something quickly to Ebner, then walked determinedly toward me across the rows of chairs. Her face was a mask of a polite smile, but her eyes burned with a mixture of fear and anger. Minus Mr. Hadley, she said, coming toward me. May I speak to you alone? Of course, I answered, trying to keep my voice calm and confident. We stepped aside to a small gazebo lined with flowers. As soon as we were out of earshot of the guests, her smile faded. What are you doing? She hissed. Why are you making such a spectacle of yourself? I just wanted you to realize who you called a tramp, I answered flatly. The man who paid for your entire wedding. You were that anonymous donor? Her voice trembled. Yes, I paid for everything 3 weeks ago, through Theodosia. I wanted to give my son a gift, even if he doesn't want to see me. Pauline turned pale. I didn't know, she said quietly. I swear I didn't know. If Theodosia had told me. I asked her not to tell, I interrupted. I wanted it to be an anonymous gift. I didn't think you'd make me look like a beggar. She lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't realize the wedding was on you. I was just protecting our day with Ebner from the unexpected. From his father, I clarified. From the man he never talks about, she parried, raising her gaze again. Ebner told me that you were barely a part of his life, that you'd always prioritize work over being with your family. I've made mistakes, I admitted. A lot of mistakes, but I never stopped loving my son. Love is in action, Mr. Hadley. Presence, support, not in checks sent after 20 years of silence. Her words were painfully precise. I had indeed tried to make up for my absence with money first offering to pay for Ebner's college, then trying to get him a car, now paying for the wedding, as if money could replace years of lost time. You're right, I said after a pause. Money can't fix the past. But it was the only thing I could offer, the only thing Ebner would probably accept from me. Pauline studied me with a look as if seeing me for the first time. Why did you come back? She asked. Why did you make that scene with the canceled payments? Because I was tired of being invisible, I answered honestly. Tired of my own son preferring to think I was dead rather than acknowledge our complicated relationship. I wanted him to see me, really see me. And for that, you were willing to ruin our wedding? There was a tone of disbelief in her voice. I wasn't going to ruin it, I countered. I offered a new payment right away. No one would have been hurt, except maybe your pride. My pride, she grinned bitterly. You nearly caused a panic among 200 guests because of your wounded pride, Mr. Hadley. Don't try to shift the blame. At that moment, Ebner came up to us. His face was tense, his eyes darting between Pauline and me. What's going on? He asked. Dad? Did you paid for our wedding? Yes, I answered, looking him in the eye. I wanted to give you a gift, an anonymous gift. And then you decided to cancel it when you weren't allowed to go to the ceremony? There was disappointment in his voice, but not surprise. It was like he expected me to behave this way. Yeah, I was impulsive, I admitted. I shouldn't have reacted that way. No, you shouldn't have, Ebner agreed. He turned to Pauline. Honey, can you give us a minute? I need to talk to my father alone. Pauline hesitated, clearly not wanting to leave us. Please, Ebner added more gently. It's all right. I can handle it. She nodded, gave me one last uncertain look, and stepped away, leaving the two of us alone in the gazebo. We were silent for a while. I looked at my son, a grown man standing in front of me in his wedding suit. So much like me in my youth, and yet so alien at the same time. Why? He finally asked. Why did you have to pay for the wedding and then make such a spectacle of it? I wanted to give you a gift, I repeated. No strings attached, no expectations. Just to know you'd have the perfect wedding. And then I found out that I was dead to you, I said quietly. That it was easier for you to think I was dead than to admit that I'd just been a bad father. Ebner looked away. Pauline told you. Yeah, and it hurts, son. It hurts more than you can imagine. Hurt worse than missing birthdays? He asked bitterly. More painful than promises you never kept? More painful than knowing your father cared more about his company than his own family? Every word was like a knife stab. But I deserved them all. No, I admitted. It doesn't hurt more. I deserve to hurt you, Ebner. I was a bad father. Putting work before family. Missed out on the important parts of your life. I understand why you turned your back on me. Then why did you show up today? He asked. Why ruin my day? I didn't want to ruin your day, I countered. I just wanted to see you happy, at least from afar. And that's why you almost ruined the ceremony? He sounded incredulous. I was wrong, I admitted. When Pauline called me a tramp, kicked me out, something inside broke. I wanted you to realize who you were rejecting. A rich man instead of a poor man? Ebner grinned bitterly. You think that matters to me? Do you think I would have invited you if I knew you could pay for the whole wedding? No, I shook my head. I know you're not. That's why I wanted to give the gift anonymously, so you wouldn't feel obligated. Ebner stared at me for a long time, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. I don't understand you, Dad, he said at last. I never did. You disappeared for years, then showed up with gifts and money as if that would fix everything. And now this. What do you want from me? Nothing, I answered honestly. I don't expect you to forgive me or let me back into your life. I just wanted to see you on your wedding day, to see that you're happy, that you're doing well, that you didn't make the same mistakes I did. Ebner was quiet for a moment, considering my words. What now? He asked. Are you going to disappear again for years? If that's what you want, I said, I won't impose. I've never wanted that. What do you want, Dad? There was something like genuine curiosity in his voice for the first time. What do you really want? I wondered. What did I want? Forgiveness, a reunion, a chance to make up for the past? I want to know my son, I finally answered. The man you become, your dreams, your fears, your joys. I want to be a part of your life, even a small part, but only if you want me to. Ebner looked at me for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to the guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. He looked at Pauline, who was watching us nervously from a distance. Today is not the time for such decisions, he said. I have a wedding, 200 guests waiting, and I'm still not sure this isn't another one of your manipulations. I understand, I nodded. I'm not asking for an answer now. Just let me stay for the ceremony. In the last row, out of sight. I just want to see my son get married. Ebner hesitated, clearly torn between different feelings. All right, he said at last. You can stay, but no scenes, no drama. This is my day and Pauline's. Of course, I agreed hastily. I'll be discreet, I promise. Ebner nodded and turned to leave. Then he stopped and added without turning around. And Dad, thank you for paying for the wedding. It means a lot. He walked away, leaving me in the gazebo with a lump in my throat and a tight feeling in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but perhaps it was the first tiny step in the right direction. The ceremony ended, oddly enough, without incident. I sat in the last row, unnoticed by most of the guests, and watched my son recite his vows of love to the woman who had called me a tramp an hour before. Life is full of irony. Ebner looked happy, though I noticed how his gaze occasionally slid in my direction, quickly, almost imperceptibly to those around him. Pauline, on the other hand, studiously avoided looking in my direction, focusing on the ceremony and smiling for the photographer. After exchanging rings and officially declaring them husband and wife, the newlyweds walked down the center aisle to the applause of the guests. As they passed me, Ebner nodded slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture, but one that meant more to me than all the words in the world. The buffet was organized in a spacious tent decorated with flowers and garlands. The tables were bursting with exquisite dishes, waiters were serving champagne, musicians were playing an unobtrusive melody. Everything was exactly as I had paid for. The perfect wedding. I kept to the side, sipping champagne and watching the festivities from afar. A few guests cast curious glances in my direction. Apparently news of the payment drama had already spread, but no one approached. I was an outsider at this celebration of life, an uninvited guest, here only by my son's grace. This is not how you envisioned this day, is it? I turned around and saw Sibylla. 22 years had hardly changed her. The same dark hair, now streaked with gray, the same attentive eyes. Hello, Sibylla, I said. No, it isn't, but I'm glad I'm here at all. She nodded and stood beside me, watching the dancing couples. Ebner and Pauline were twirling around in the center of the tent, smiling at each other. They make a handsome couple, Sibyl remarked. Yes, I agreed. Our son looks happy. He is happy, she confirmed. At least he was before you showed up and made a scene. I sighed. Shakir, I'm not proud of my behavior, but you can understand. Being exposed as a beggar from your son's own wedding, which you paid for but weren't invited to, she finished for me. Yeah, I heard that story. The whole room is buzzing. I'm sorry if I ruined the day. It's not for me to tell you about regrets, Orson, Sybil said quietly. We both have enough of them. We were silent for a moment, watching the dancers. It was strange to stand next to the woman I'd once loved, the woman I'd lived with for 15 years and feel like almost strangers. Why did you come tonight? She asked at last. After all these years. Because it's my only son's wedding, I answered simply. I had missed too many important days in his life. I couldn't miss this one. Even knowing you weren't invited, that Ebner didn't want to see you? Even so, I nodded. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a miracle. A chance to at least talk to him. Sybil shook her head. You've always been an idealist, Orson. Always believing that you could fix everything with one beautiful gesture. And you've always been a realist, I countered. Always seeing only what is, not what could be. Maybe that's why we didn't work, she said with a slight smile. Two different ways of looking at the world. At that moment, Ebner came up to us. He looked serious, even worried. Mom, Dad, he said, and it was strange to hear him call me Dad after all these years. I need to talk to both of you, alone. We followed him into the small library in the main building. Ebner closed the door and turned to us. I want to know the truth, he said without preamble. The whole truth about your divorce and what happened afterward. Sybil and I looked at each other. It was a conversation we had both avoided for 22 years. What exactly do you want to know? Sybil asked cautiously. Everything, Ebner said firmly. Dad says he tried to keep in touch, that he came to my matches, sent gifts. Is that true? Sybil turned pale but nodded. Shum, she said quietly. It's true. Ebner stared at her stunned. And you kept it from me? All these years. I was trying to protect you, Sybil answered, her voice trembling. From pain, from disappointment. Your father. He always put work first. I was afraid he would hurt you again. So you lied to me? Ebner asked incredulously. Told me he didn't call, didn't write, didn't come, intercepted his gifts? Yes, Sybil admitted. I did. Ebner turned to me, his eyes a mixture of anger and pain. And you? Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you come in person? Why didn't you insist on your right to see me? I tried, I answered. In the early years after the divorce, I hired a lawyer to push for more visitation rights. But all my attempts to see you were rebuffed. You didn't want to see me, so I was told. And when you got older and could make your own decisions, you believed I'd abandoned you, that I didn't care. And yet you gave up, Ebner said bitterly. Let it happen. I never gave up completely, I objected. I followed your life through mutual acquaintances, knew when you went to college, when you got your first job. I even tried to help financially, anonymously. But yeah, in a way, I did give up, and that's my greatest mistake. Ebner looked at both of us, and there was such pain in his eyes that my heart squeezed. You both, he said quietly. You both robbed me of a normal childhood. You, Dad, by your absence and your obsession with work. And you, Mom, with your lies and manipulation. You both used me in your war against each other. Ebner, that's not true, Sybil began, but he held up his hand, stopping her. Yes, it is. You used me as a weapon against my father. And you, Dad, used money as a substitute for a real relationship. You both thought you knew what was best for me. But neither of you asked me what I wanted. We were silent because there was nothing to say. He was right. We had both, in our own way, failed him. I want to know everything, Ebner continued. Every detail, every lie, every attempt at communication. I have a right to know my own story. And so we told it. Sybil talked about her fear and bitterness after the divorce, about how she feared I would break Ebner's heart, how I had broken hers. I talked about my attempts to be a part of my son's life, about attending matches, about gifts, about following his progress through third hands, about how work was really my priority in the early years of marriage, and how I realized my mistake too late. Ebner listened in silence, his face growing more and more tense. At that moment, the door opened and Pauline entered the library. She looked worried. Ebner, Is everything all right? The guests are asking about you. Not now, Pauline, Ebner answered without turning around. I have an important conversation with my parents. But honey, it's our wedding, she insisted, stepping closer. People are waiting. The DJ has already announced us twice for the next dance. Ebner turned to her, and I could see the irritation on his face. I said, not now. This is more important. Pauline blinked, clearly not expecting such a rebuff. More important than our wedding? She asked with a hint of resentment in her voice. More important than the 200 guests who came to congratulate us? Yes, Ebner said firmly. More important. I just found out that my whole life had been built on lies, that my parents kept the truth from me for 22 years. I think it's worth a few minutes of my time. Pauline looked at me, and in her eyes I saw unconcealed dislike. Of course it was today, our wedding day. Couldn't it have waited a week, a month? Did we have to have family drama right now? Her words, spoken with ill-concealed irritation, made Ebner frown. Pauline, he said in a warning tone, this is important to me. And me? She asked. Our wedding? Our guests? Aren't they important? I could see the emotion struggling on Ebner's face, love for his new wife, obligation to his guests, shock at the secrets he just revealed. Give me another 10 minutes, he said at last. Then I'll go back to the guests. Pauline opened her mouth to object, but changed her mind. Instead, she turned to me. Minus Mr. Hadley, she said with strained politeness, I understand that you have important family matters to discuss. But today is our wedding day, a day that should be about me and Ebner, not about past grudges and family secrets. Couldn't it wait? I wanted to reply that 22 years of waiting was enough, but I held back. Instead, I looked at Ebner. It was his choice, not mine. Nah, Emma, Pauline's right, Sybil said suddenly. Today is your day. Orson and I aren't going anywhere. We can continue this conversation tomorrow, when everyone's calmer. Ebner shifted his gaze from me to his mother, then to Pauline. I could see him struggling with himself. Okay, he finally said. You're right. Now is not the time. He turned to me. Dad, will you stay until the end of the reception? If you want to, I said. I do, he nodded. We still have a lot to talk about. Tomorrow. I'll be waiting, I said. Pauline brightened, taking Ebner's hand in hers. Good. Now let's go. They're really waiting for us. They left the library, leaving me alone with Sibylla. We were silent for a while, thinking about what had happened. Did you see her face? Sibylla finally asked. When Ebner said that talking to us was more important than the wedding? I did, I nodded. Pauline isn't used to things being more important than what she wants. She reminds me of you when you were younger, Sibylla said with a touch of irony. Just as determined, just as focused on her priorities. I wanted to object, but I realized she was right. Pauline did remind me of me in those years when work was more important than anything else. I hope Ebner doesn't make the same mistakes I did, I said quietly. He's smarter than both of us, Sibyl replied. He always had been. We left the library and went back to the reception. Ebner and Pauline were dancing in the center of the room, smiling at the guests. But I noticed that my son's smile didn't reach his eyes. He was here body but not soul, immersed in thoughts of the mysteries he had just solved. Pauline, on the other hand, was radiant, completely given to the moment. She reveled in the attention, the admiring glances, the compliments. This was her day, her triumph, and she wasn't about to let Ebner's family problems ruin it. I watched them and thought about how different they were. Ebner, thoughtful, deep, willing to postpone his own wedding for the sake of an important conversation. Pauline, bright, superficial, putting form over substance. They were like day and night, fire and ice. After a while, Pauline noticed my gaze and said something to Ebner. He nodded, and they headed toward me. Minus Mr. Hadley? Pauline began with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. I wanted to thank you again for your generosity. Without you, this wedding would not have been so perfect. I'm glad I was able to help, I replied, looking at my son. It's important to me that Ebner is happy. Oh, he's very happy, Pauline said quickly, squeezing her husband's hand. Isn't he, darling? Ebner smiled weakly. Yes, of course he is. I could see that his thoughts were far away. Pauline noticed it too, and irritation flashed across her face. Ebner is so glad you were able to attend, she continued, though it was obvious she was speaking for herself and not her husband. Though, of course, a warning would have been helpful. We could have prepared, put you on the program. Pauline, Ebner interrupted her, a warning in his voice. She stopped talking, but I could see in her face that she wasn't happy. She wasn't used to being interrupted, not used to Ebner contradicting her. Dad, Ebner said, looking me in the eye, I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, I'm glad you're here today. And I'm glad we're finally having this conversation. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad too, son, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. More than you can imagine. Pauline shifted her gaze from me to Ebner, and I could see the worry growing in her eyes. She hadn't expected our reunion to be so sincere, that Ebner would actually want to reconnect with me. Well, she said with a strained smile, I guess we should get back to the guests. The DJ announced that there would be a cake cutting in 10 minutes. Of course, Ebner nodded. He looked at me again. We'll talk tomorrow. About everything. I'll be waiting, I replied. They left and I stood there, staring after them. And I thought about how Pauline's true nature had become obvious to everyone in those few minutes. Her concern was not for Ebner and his feelings, but for the smooth running of the wedding, about making sure everything went according to plan, that nothing disrupted the perfect picture. I didn't know if Ebner could see that, whether he realized he'd married a woman who cared more about form than substance, about the outside of life rather than what really mattered. But it was his choice, his life, and I was just a father returning after 22 years away. I had no right to judge or interfere. It was a week after the wedding. I waited for a call from Ebner, the very conversation he'd promised, but the phone was silent. I didn't rush things. I realized that my son and his new wife were probably on a wedding trip. Plus, he needed time to digest everything he'd learned on his wedding day. When 2 weeks and then a month went by without a word, I began to worry. Maybe Ebner had changed his mind. Maybe Pauline had convinced him it wasn't worth rehashing the past. Or worse, had Sybil interfered again? Finally, unable to bear the suspense, I called Archibald. If anyone could know what was going on in Ebner's life, it was an old family friend. They got back from Italy 3 days ago, Archie informed me. Cecina, Bertha had talked to Sibylla. Looks like the honeymoon didn't go too smoothly. What happened? I asked, feeling my insides tighten with anxiety. Quarrels, Archie answered briefly. A lot of fights. Pauline wanted to spend time at fancy resorts and take pictures for social media. Ebner preferred historical sites and museums. Classic conflict of interest. And they're just now noticing it? I wondered. How can you live together for years and not realize how different you are? You'd be surprised, Archie chuckled. People see what they want to see, especially when they're in love. I remembered myself and Sybil at the beginning of our relationship, how we'd overlooked the fundamental differences in our values and priorities, blinded by passion and mutual attraction, how those differences then slowly eroded our marriage, undermining it from the inside out. Do you think I should call Ebner? I asked after a pause. Give him time, Archie advised. He's dealing with his marriage, with his relationship with his mother, with his own feelings. He needs space. I followed my friend's advice and didn't call. Instead, I sent a quick text saying, I'm here when you're ready to talk. Succinct, no pressure. Just a reminder that I was waiting. The reply didn't come until 3 days later. We can meet on Saturday, Riverbend Cafe, 14 o'clock. On the appointed day, I arrived early, chose a table in the corner, and ordered coffee. I was as nervous as a teenager before a first date. Funny, I, a 65-year-old man who'd built a successful business, gone through a divorce and 22 years of loneliness, was afraid to talk to my own son. Ebner showed up exactly at the appointed time. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes, the tense line of his mouth, the slouching shoulders. Not a happy newlywed returning from a paradise vacation. Dad, he nodded, sitting down across from me. Ebner, I said, it's good to see you. He ordered an espresso and was silent for a while, gathering his thoughts. I didn't rush him, letting him start talking when he was ready. I talked to my mom, he finally said. A long talk. She confirmed everything you said at the wedding. It's about the gifts, about going to the matches, about trying to get in touch. I nodded, not knowing what to say. She honestly thought she was protecting me, Ebner continued. From pain, from disappointment, from your fickleness. She was afraid that you would come into my life and then disappear again, immersed in your work. I understand her fears, I said, but she had no right to make that decision for you. To deprive you of your father, however imperfect he might be? I agree, Ebner nodded. I told her the same thing. We, we have a complicated relationship right now. I can't just forget 22 years of lies. Don't jump to conclusions, I advised. Sybil loves you. Everything she did, even if it was wrong, was motivated by love and care. Ebner looked at me in surprise. You're protecting her? After everything she's done? I'm trying to be fair, I replied. Yes, what she did was wrong. But I wasn't a perfect father either. I did work too much, missed important events in your life, put business before family. I gave her reasons not to trust me. Ebner twirled the cup thoughtfully in his hands. You know what the most frustrating thing is? That you both decided for me. Deciding that I was better off not seeing my father, that it was better to think you were dead to have a complicated relationship. No one asked me what I wanted. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. He was right. What about Pauline? I asked, changing the subject. How was the honeymoon? Ebner's face changed instantly, his lips tight, his eyes strained. Not so good, he said briefly. It turned out that we had different ideas about the perfect vacation, and a lot of other things. It's normal, I said carefully. All couples go through an adjustment period, getting used to it. It's not just that, Ebner shook his head. Pauline, she's different when we're alone. Not the way I knew her before we were married. More demanding, more cold. I remembered Pauline on the wedding day, her irritation when Ebner chose family conversation over dancing and entertainment, her ostentatious politeness and fake smile. But I kept silent. It's not for me to interfere in my son's relationship with his wife. She's angry about our conversation, Ebner continued. She says you're manipulating me, trying to bring discord into our family, that your showing up at the wedding was a selfish act that ruined our day. Muffin, what do you think? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Ebner looked me straight in the eye. I think we've all made mistakes. You, Mom, myself, even Pauline. But I also think everyone should have a chance to get better, including you. Those words warmed my heart. For the first time in 22 years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, I said quietly. It means a lot to me. We talked for another hour or so. Ebner talked about his work in cybersecurity, about his future plans, about the house he and Pauline had bought in the suburbs. I talked about my company and how I'm slowly stepping away from the business, handing over management to the younger generation. When it was time to say goodbye, we exchanged phone numbers and agreed to call each other regularly. Not too often, once every week or two, so as not to put pressure on Ebner and give him space to deal with his own life. One more thing, Dad, he said before he left. I want you to know that I don't hold a grudge against you. Yes, you've made mistakes, but I realize you've always tried to do what you thought was right. Thank you, son, I said, fighting the lump in my throat. That's more than I deserve. We hugged awkwardly, the first hug in 22 years, and Ebner left, and I was left sitting in the cafe, overwhelmed with complicated emotions. For the next few weeks, we called each other regularly. Nothing deep, just short conversations about everyday things, about work, about the weather. Slowly, step by step, we were getting to know each other anew, relearning how to be father and son. But the more we talked, the more I noticed the anxious note in Ebner's voice when it came to Pauline. He never complained directly, but in the little things, in the reservations, in the pauses, I sensed that their marriage was cracking at the seams. And then, about 2 months after we met at the cafe, I got a text from Ebner. Pauline and I are breaking up. Can you come over? I called him immediately. My son's voice sounded tired but calm. Sukrun, what's wrong? I asked. I found her correspondence, he answered briefly. With a friend. She wrote about me, unpleasant things about me, that she only married me for my money, that I'm a loser in bed, that she was grateful to you for paying for the wedding. Otherwise, she would have had to save money. I didn't know what to say. I get it, Dad, Ebner continued. You were right about her from the beginning. She really only cared about the outside of things, about reputation, about status, about money, not about me. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I'm really sorry. You know what the funny thing is? There was a bitter irony in Ebner's voice. Mom was right too. She'd said from the beginning that Pauline wasn't the right girl for me, that she was too superficial, too concerned with the trappings of success, and I didn't listen. I thought Mom was just jealous. Sybil was always perceptive, I remarked. Yes, she was right about that. I arrived at Ebner's house that evening. His house, a large, modern, upscale suburb, looked immaculate on the outside, but the inside was chaotic. Things strewn about, open suitcases, an overturned vase. Pauline was here, Ebner explained, seeing my gaze, picking up her things. We had a fight. Really? She threatened to destroy me. Ebner smiled tiredly. Tell everyone what I was really like. Ruin my reputation. Ruin me through the courts. The usual threats of a jilted woman. What are you going to do? I asked, walking into the living room. Nothing, Ebner shrugged. We have a good prenup. She'll get what's due, nothing more, nothing less. And her threats. He waved his hand. They're nothing. I looked at my son carefully. Despite his fatigue and stress, he looked free, like he'd taken a heavy weight off his shoulders. You don't seem particularly upset, I said. It's weird, isn't it? Ebner smiled weakly. I should be heartbroken, but I feel mostly relieved. I guess deep down I always knew that Pauline wasn't the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. I nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. How many years had I refused to admit that my marriage to Sibylla was falling apart, that our values and priorities were too different, that we were both unhappy? What about Sibylla? I asked. Have you talked to her about the divorce? Yes. Ebner nodded. She was very reserved. She didn't gloat. She didn't say, I told you so. She just said she'd support whatever decision I made. That's good, I said. So she's changed too. She's wiser. We've all changed, Ebner said thoughtfully. You, me, Mom, even Pauline. She's changed since the wedding too. Colder, more demanding, angrier. Or maybe she just stopped pretending. People rarely change for the worse, I said. More often they just stop hiding who they really are. We talked into the night, about the past and the future, about hopes and disappointments, about how to build relationships without repeating the mistakes of the past. It was the conversation we'd been missing for 22 years. The next day, just as I was about to leave, a sports car pulled into the driveway in front of Ebner's house. Pauline jumped out of it, disheveled, tear-stained eyes, not at all like the cold beauty I'd seen at the wedding. Ebner, she shouted when she saw us both on the porch. You can't do this to me. Not after everything we've been through. Pauline, we've already talked it over, Ebner said tiredly. Please go away. No, she ran closer. You can't throw me out of your life like I'm nothing. I'm your wife. Ex-wife, Ebner corrected. The divorce papers have already been filed. Pauline looked at me, her eyes narrowed with rage. It's you, she hissed. You ruined everything. You turned him against me. You ruined our wedding, and now you've ruined our marriage. Pauline, Ebner stepped forward. My father had nothing to do with this. It's my choice, and it's based on your actions, not his words. Liar, she shouted. You've always been a weakling. You've always succumbed to other people's influence. First your mother controlled you, now your father. I saw how those words hurt Ebner, how he flinched at every insult, and something inside me broke. For 22 years I hadn't been there for my son, hadn't protected him, but now I could do it. Pauline, I said quietly, but with such inner strength that she stopped talking and turned toward me. I understand your pain and anger, but if you continue to insult my son, if you try to tarnish his reputation or hurt him in any way, I will use every resource I have, and there are many to protect him. Every word you say, every message, every threat you make will be documented and used against you. You'll lose not only your money but your reputation. Pauline went pale. Fear flashed in her eyes. Real, genuine fear. You can't. You wouldn't dare. Try and find out, I replied. Now please leave. Calmly and with dignity. It's the best way out for everyone. She looked at me for a long moment, then shifted her gaze to Ebner. Something in her face had changed. Something of anger replaced by bitterness. Rage by fatigue. Both of you, she began, but her voice trailed off. She shook her head, turned and walked quickly away to her car. As she drove away, Ebner turned to me. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking my side. I'm your father, I replied simply, as late as it sounded. We stood on the porch watching Paulaine's car drive away, and I thought about how strange everything had turned out. A month ago, I'd been a stranger at my own son's wedding, an uninvited guest who'd been made to look like a tramp. Today, I stood by his side, defending him against unfair accusations. What now? Ebner asked. What will happen to us? You, me, Mom. I don't know, I answered honestly. I think we all need space and time. Old grudges are too deep to disappear overnight. But we can try to build something new, something better. I'd like that, Ebner nodded. I'd like that very much. We hugged, this time without awkwardness, for real. Then I got into the car and drove away, feeling both bitter and relieved. Bitterness at the lost years, at the mistakes that can't be undone, and release from the weight of guilt and regret I had carried for 22 years. I didn't know what lay ahead. Would Ebner and I be able to build a true father-son relationship? Would he be able to forgive Sibylla for her years of lies? Would he recover from the collapse of his marriage? But I was sure of one thing. I would no longer be a part of this toxic family dynamic where lies and manipulation were the norm. I will be honest with my son, even if that honesty hurts, and I will be there for him when he needs me. Maybe that's the most important lesson I've learned over the years. True love isn't about loud gestures or expensive gifts. It's about being there for each other. Just being there.